2, 1, and welcome, Jolene. So, how is your day going? You said you were a little bit busy today.
It's been going good. I own a cleaning business, so I'm trying to market my books on whenever I'm not running the business. So,
Are you like accidentally leaving books at customers' houses? Like, oops, how did that get there?
I have not done that, but that is a good idea.
That's a little trick from when I was a missionary. We would just accidentally.
I have been offering them like, here, like just happen to like mention it. Oh, you have books that are very similar to books that I would write. You would like, But no, I don't do a lot of cleaning anymore. Since I actually run the business, I have 6 cleaners that work for me. I did go today. We're understaffed for a little bit while we're still hiring other people. So I have to like fill in and whatnot. But
that's also exciting being an entrepreneur as well. One of my previous guests was an old mission companion of mine. He helps individuals create wealth opportunities through establishing LLCs. And we had a whole episode on that. That was really great. So it's really exciting to see a lot of people in the church starting to do that.
I enjoy giving other people jobs. I had a really hard time finding a job when I got divorced. And I didn't really have, I had a college education and I was overqualified to do anything. And I did at the time enjoy cleaning. So I decided, I'll just clean for a while and that'll give me the flexibility to write. I didn't actually have the flexibility to write because I focused so much on building the company for the last 10 years. But now I finally have it at a place where I can get back to writing and marketing my books and stuff like that. So that is my current goal.
I'm just going to start this little project, a little project 10 years later.
I know. Well, and that is kind of the way it goes. With, just with writing. Yeah. And just finding like the time and getting discouraged. Writing can be very discouraging when you've gotten so many letters that are like, I'm sorry, we only want lesbian porn. And you're like, okay, well, I don't write lesbian porn, so I don't know what to do to help you. So.
I know that those books exist, but that I haven't heard anyone get told that before. That's I don't know if that's discouraging, but
if you look at the book industry and you go to the gatekeepers, which are the book agents, what they are asking for right now is lesbian or transgender erotica. And not only do I not do erotica, my stuff is spiritual. So it's just not in their market. They think that they know what America wants. And I tend to disagree. A lot of you'll see a lot of times in like the news, they had that whole like, oh, we're going to redo Snow White and whatnot. And we're going to make her like this kick-ass, girl. But women still want to be saved, by men. We still want that, fairy tale, life. We still want to fall in love kind of thing. There's nothing wrong. You don't need to change the story. And my stories aren't like falling in love kind of thing, but they aren't like, so I have 2 main characters. One is Desiree and one is Zach. Zach is not a he basically was a believer in his old world, but then when he's saved and he comes to this immortal world, he no longer believes and he rebels against his God. And he's fighting, literally fighting against the God and his powers and his soldiers in order for him to be able to have his free will and to do what he wants to do in the path that create his own destiny. And then I have Desiree, who is literally the opposite. She knew nothing about God in her old life. And then she goes into more immortality and she wants nothing but to have a family and to follow God. But that's not her destiny. It is her destiny to follow God. But it's not just her destiny to just have a family. She's destined to literally expel evil spirits from people that are trapped in despair. That is her destiny. And Zach's destiny is what I call a soul gazer. And I don't know if I made that up or if I saw that in some other book or in some sci-fi, because I'm a huge sci-fi person and I don't distinctly remember it being somewhere else. But I do remember as a child, I was in the foster care system. So I was separated from my sisters. And as a child, I got very, very lonely without them. And so at night, I would pray and I would be like, so Heavenly Father, I want to be with my sisters. Can you send my soul to my sisters so that we can meet in our dreams? And so that kind of idea, I don't know if it's possible. In my dreams, I would literally talk to my sisters, you know? I don't know if that really happened or if it was just dreams, you know? But that idea of soul gazing is in my book. Where that is what he does. He goes and he sends his soul to like this other realm so that he can communicate with other spirits and help them out of despair. It's complicated.
Yeah, fantasy and sci-fi tends to get complicated very fast.
It does. And you won't see, so this book, particularly in Kalani, is called The Shadows of Destiny. So you see glimpses of what they will be. It's like huge character building, like how did they get on the world? What is the world like? How do they function? How are they resisting this new immortal world? And it's building up to their adventures. But so you see the shadows, like you will see like their spiritual powers. And so what I did is I took, to be able to expel evil spirits is a spiritual power. To be able to read someone else's soul, and we call it discernment, is a spiritual power. And so instead of giving them, flying abilities or some kind of, typical superhero is what I meant to say. Instead of giving them typical superhero powers, I gave them spiritual hero powers. Does that make sense?
Okay. That does make a lot of sense. Who said it? It's like I always forget who says it, and I use this quote so often, so it's kind of shameful of me. But it was a sufficiently advanced society would appear to be magical to a non-sufficiently advanced society. So, how things are working in some worlds, if we were to go back in time to the 1700s with a projector, you would be so quickly accosted as a sorcerer or a witch, and they would attempt to burn you at the stake as fast as possible. to rid this devil amongst them.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I really like when sci-fi novels kind of go more into the fi.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I had a lot of fun creating my world and my future technology, again, all of my technology um, is powered by faith. So in order for them to move from one, they go onto a land bridge and they put their hands in front of this little triangle. You know what a triangle is, like the Godhead, but like a triangle. And it scans their palms and it transports them in the sky like a rainbow to the other side of the planet or wherever they're going. And there are other things like they go into, it's like basically there's one thing that's called a stylist. It is basically like a magic mirror where they look in it and through their faith, it changes their clothes. There's tons of things. They have these house kits that everyone designs their own house kits based on the faith that's in their mind. So their house is whatever they envisioned it to be. But, every single thing on the planet is powered by faith. And one of the things that the characters have a hard time, one of the characters have a hard time with is it real? Like, if we were to go to this world that is technically a hologram world, is the fact that it's a hologram and it's powered by faith, does that make it not real? And it just kind of is supposed to make you think about how people, talk about, oh, well, you can't physically see faith, so it's not real. Like, prove it to me. Prove it to me. Prove it to me. Well, they're living in a world that can't be proven that exists because it's a hologram. It only exists because they believe it exists. Does that make sense?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. So there's many things that are like that I had particularly fun about. And then I did talk about, I don't necessarily talk about them as much as the characters. A lot of books used to be written in third person. That's the she did this and they did that. And like basically like an omniscient narrator kind of. That was typically the old style. Now, a lot of books nowadays are coming out at first person. And I particularly took an interest in the first person, especially when you're discovering things. So a lot of the things about the land you might not know yet, or you might discover little by little because the characters themselves have only been on the land or on this immortal world for about the equivalent of our 6 months. There's no actual time in eternity, but we're just going to say 6 moons and I had to come up with like a different way of like, regulating time, because in a book, you actually talk about time. Time has to go, but you just calculate it. So you're talking about time, even though it's completely irrelevant in their space and time. Does that make sense?
Oh,
that
yeah.
that was something hard for me to navigate was, okay, well, I can't just say days. I can't just say moons. Like, they're new to the world. So time still does matter to them because they haven't switched that mindset yet. But in an eternal perspective, time has no matter or time has no meaning. But so the ultimate story is one of good versus evil. So in the and that the people of Kalani, their ultimate goal is to save people from this world of pericolum, it's like an earthly world, and bring it to the spiritual world so that they can have immortality and live forever before they die. Now, in some ways, that is like Christianity, where they're saved. There's like this transformation where it's kind of similar to being baptized. When they get on the spaceship, they're like doused in like mist. They're in, basically baptized-ish, but in a sci-fi kind of, capsule. And they're brought to this new world where they're perfect. But some of the things that certain Christians may not get, but Latter-day Saints may get, is the concept that immortality is progression. And this is what I proposed, if free will existed in the pre-existence, if free will exists now, then it's an eternal concept. And as an eternal concept, it must continue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sure.
In my book. So in my book, there is still free will. Like a lot of Christian churches, or a lot of just faith ideas, just in general, it doesn't have to be Christians, believe that their afterlife is just happy. They're going to sing all day. They're just going to rest. They're not going to do anything. And that idea of immortality would be the most boring thing that I've ever heard of. Like, I would not want to live in that immortality. That would be like singing God's praises all day long has to be like torture for me. Like, I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to continue to do something. And I'm not talking about becoming a god. I'm just talking about progressing, continuing to learn, to interact, and to make choices, So anyway, and so also with the contrasting characters, the reason that there's actually, it goes back and forth. It starts out with Zach. And the reason that I actually start out with Zach and his rebellion is because most readers will read, women and men will read a male character. Men will almost always not read a female character. That almost always. I'm not going to say that there's like a blanket, that they won't read them. So what I did is I created two main characters where their stories are intertwining. They're two completely separate stories that in the end will come into one story. And Zach, as far as like family backgrounds, they have completely different family backgrounds. Zach had a very loving, very nurturing, very close knit family. He was well taken care of. He was wealthy. And he was, he was just, like pretty much the elite of his old world. And Desiree, on the other hand, was the opposite. She was a foster kid. She is the daughter of a murderer. And she was put into a foster home when her dad killed her mom. And it takes her situation, and she dies. Doesn't die. She's saved before she dies at age 16. So she arrives on this planet, and she has to navigate what does that mean for her, because if she didn't have a family on that world, she doesn't have a family on this one. So she's put into another foster home, but it's of course different because it's an immortal one, right? And unlike Zach, who because his parents are still alive, he's put into his grandparents' home. And so his grandparents continue to raise him, kind of thing. So like family kind of members. So they just have completely different backgrounds, which I think contrast nicely as the story unfolds. But so those are the two main characters. One of my favorite characters is technically not even a character. He's like he's the ruler of Kalani, and his name is Neff. So I gave all of my gods names. The main god is Magnar, and he is married to a woman named Ishi. And they have, they had a similar kind of person to Jesus. They had this guy called Kolam. And then we have what I would equivalate to the Holy Ghost. And I call him Neff. And he is a spirit man that rules this immortal world. And his entire, like, what he does all day is meditate. And he sieves the messages that all the people of Kalani are sending back to Pericolam, and the messages from Pericolam to Magnar. And he's basically like a gatekeeper, but he also has a light that of faith that he endows inside a crystal for the people who choose to follow Magnar. Now, not everyone on the planet chooses to follow Magnar, so not everyone has these things. And the crystals, LDS will recognize it. It's actually called Eliahona. So I took that term because it was a term that I felt the audience would recognize. Eliahona in the LDS church is considered a direction. It's a compass. And I took that idea and I added it. It's a necklace and that holds a crystal that also has a compass on it that always points to the world of Magnar, which is not Kalani. Kalani is technically the heavens. Kalani in Hawaiian means the heavens, which is why I named it Kalani. So we're talking about the spirit world, the heavens. And so in the crystal is Neff's faith, or his light. And that's how they navigate the immortal world, is through, his spirit. There were some things that I personally learned and discovered about the Godhead through writing the book. And one of them was, and this is my opinion, is that the Holy Ghost is an eternal missionary. He's the ultimate missionary. He literally does nothing but testify on our earth. He testifies of Jesus Christ, and bring people, he testifies of the truth, and he brings people to God. So that is literally the only thing that he does, which makes him a full-time missionary. And so that is something that I discovered when I was writing the book, and I included that idea in it. Of course, he's a ruler. Of this planet, but he would also have been uncontested. So what would a ruler that's never been, tested be like? So there were some things that I, had to work out. There were things that, I had to deviate from because it's a sci-fi world. I had to use my own imagination. Like, it would just to say, for example, God and Jesus and, the Holy Ghost would kind of be boring. So I created them to have their own names. I changed the story. Like the entire creation story is completely different in this universe. How God became God. I don't know that hopefully people aren't too offended because I'm a female writer, but my adversary is a woman. So in the backstory, my God and the Arai. So Magnar and Arai. And Arai means twisted. Came to be in existence at the exact same time. So good and evil, came into existence. But Magnar is a man and, Arai is a girl. It has nothing to do with the fact that, that just happened to be how I imagined the character. Not because I think that women are evil. Does that make sense?
That's going to upset a few people.
Yes, I do predict that. But maybe
it's
the
like,
backlash.
What do you want? You want strong, independent women, or do you want slave women? Why can't she be the adversarial?
Yeah, I might not get as much backlash because I am a woman. Had you written it, or another man, or like a man had written it, but I do see some people being upset about that. But that is how I envisioned it. So
I think when it comes down to it, earlier you mentioned the probability of somebody reading a perspective. In high school, this is around like 2000s, 2008-ish. All these girls were reading this black book with an apple on it. And I was like, Twilight, what is that? And they started telling, like, I just asked one of my classmates, like, what is that book? Everyone has got a copy. And I wasn't invited and nobody told me. So I was curious. And she said it was this like vampire story that's different and basically gave the story Twilight. And I was like, that sounds terribly written. And so if you've ever seen the movie The Other Guys, I was like Mark Wahlberg's character where I was taking ballet class to make fun of the ballet guys, but actually enjoyed it. And so I bought this book, started reading it to make fun of it. There are some really severe writing issues with it. It's actually not really the best story, but it's a decent story and it spawned a whole bunch of movies. And that entire book is from a female perspective, albeit she's a very annoying character to read. But that is from the thing. So I think when it comes down to it, readers and viewers don't really care who the main character is if that character is interesting person to watch. Like Hollywood has this issue with trying to do these strong female type movies, and they blow a bunch of money on this movie and they're like, oh, people don't like this because they're misogynists, they're anti-feminists, they don't like this movie. It's like, here's a crazy concept. Did you think to make a character that people would like or hate? And did you drive a story around that premise of this will be interesting to watch? Because there's tons of movies and stories driven by a female character that are very interesting. Yours is just like watching Jell-O solidify and nobody wants to do it. It's like, why don't you have good writing? Why don't you have good writing? That I think that's the issue. And for a fickle audience, it's interesting. I
think boys got into.
Yeah.
Oh, I think boys got into Twilight because of the vampires and the werewolves and stuff like that. That whole element of it. So
And she did write a book from the perspective of the male vampire, and that was just kind of terrible. And then she wrote actually a sci-fi book, but her stories.
I'm going to be
Stephanie
very careful
Meyer,
not to comment on other people's writing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she
I got my own
clearly has
opinions, but I'm
this
not going to say them.
idea. And then, as you were talking about agents, because of that, it was like I feel like there's this audience to capture this attention of teenagers, and it spawned. So because of Twilight, there became Twilight-ish books that, this teenage romance and this different thing going on. And
well, there are several reasons. One, we can only grow up once. We can only be young once. So putting a character as a teenager is very popular. That coming of age story tends to be very popular with writers because a lot of people, when they get older, I'm 40 and I still would rather read about a character that is younger, because what adventures is the 40-year-old going on, like they just don't, you don't see the growth arc in a 40-year-old that you see in a 16-year-old. And I think that's the difference, is that for a character story to be extremely interesting, you need that growth arc. But I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of, books out there that are great that have, 40-year-old characters and whatnot.
And I think it also has to do with your typesetting. Like, for instance, a teenage detective is cute, but it's not as serious as a Sherlock Holmes character. Not to say that you can't have a teenage detective like Enola Holmes, which apparently is daughter or niece of Sherlock Holmes. I remember my sister getting into these books. Nancy Drew, teenage detective, right there. So it's not that you can't. It's just different risks. Like, Nancy Drew's not going to be in a gunfight in the back alleyway with some drug dealer. You have different conflicts of interest. Maybe she
might be now. There's no limits.
It's like,
I think the one thing that I disliked about the way that modern society is going is the stories where all of a sudden they've got 8-year-olds that are saving the world while their parents are super stupid and oblivious. Like one of those stories is interesting, but now that seems to be like
a common trope.
If we're going to make a kid's story, that's the kid's story. That's the only one that's allowed. The parents have to be idiots,
I think that also there's some argument to be had for that idea to work as kids. You don't have 40 years of experience as a child. Your perspective is very limited. Depending on what age the story's taking place, they've started to grow and realize that there's other people out there and there's other things going on and there's these different dilemmas. So sometimes, like, as a child, your parents may have told you X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh, this is crap. You don't know anything. Or especially in the teenage years where nothing your parents say is right, or they're automatically wrong. They've never experienced this before. So I think there is some kind of poetry to that perspective. Yeah, I do see a lot of like the kid movies made for like the 8 to 11-year-old movies. The parents are like completely ooh. But for those who are older, like Charlie Brown, is all about kids. And what does it do anytime the parents are talking? Yeah.
That's
So,
true. But that was yeah. I had forgotten about that.
it's just, it's
It was not one
interesting.
of my favorite cartoons.
I,
No.
there,
If I was going to say that one of the cartoons that I really liked, it would have been like the Pound Puppies or something. I liked the Pound Puppies, how like they went and they saved the world.
yeah, it's different. I think Charlie Brown is a certain group. I know I've seen some kids wear it. I feel like it's kind of like Mickey Mouse almost. You either like it or you don't. So I wanted to ask you earlier before you went off about your book.
Sorry.
Normally people want to write stories about things, especially fantasy, that aren't existing, but you decided you wanted to kind of write a faith building story. And it sounds like Christianity is a very important aspect. Did you feel like you had to write your first novel this way, or is this just sort of the story that you've just always had? Like, if I write a book, this is what I want to do.
Okay, so I have written a comedy, and that is a novel. So this wouldn't be my first book. This would be my first sci-fi book.
First sci-fi.
So,
okay,
and it did have a Mormon character in it. It was a comedy. It was called Dog Breath, or it is called Dog Breath. In fact, I'm almost done with the audiobook for it, and or actually, I am done with it. It's going to be released on Audible, like within the next month. So that is done. But the I had started a couple of different other novels, and then I never finished them. I was halfway through one novel and I got this idea of this world that just kind of came to me. So, and I think some of it had to do with the fact that I was a foster kid. So my experience in the church has always been an outsider. My biological parents were, my mother she had left the church, and she was a stripper. And my dad was a murderer, just like my character. And I was put into multiple foster homes and in the church. So I was put into foster homes through the church. The church had a thing called social services a long time ago. And so I went through multiple homes. And when I finally did find a home, I was 9. I was not adopted because my biological parents would not give me up. So I was still considered a foster parent or a foster child until I was 21, when I was finally allowed to be adopted. Now, being a foster child was hard enough because in our church, we talk about eternal families. So that is the main focus. And I could never resolve in my mind what would happen to me in eternity. So I would constantly think about what would life be like in this if I went to a Mormon heaven. Like, I wouldn't have a family. My family wouldn't be allowed there, or would they? Like, because when I was a teenager, I didn't understand the atonement. I didn't understand different things that, for example, my biological dad had schizophrenia. I didn't understand as a teenager that according to the doctrine, he would go and Jesus would fix him. Like that's not something that I knew until I was an adult. So as a child and a teenager, I never imagined my biological family with me in eternity. I also had a hard time with my foster parents for a couple of reasons. And I don't mean this in any disrespect. And I don't want people to badmouth my parents. My parents never had children, and they took me in and they took my sisters in. Within a year, they put my other sisters back into the foster care system, and they kept me. Now, what this does to a child, what it did to me, was I have someone telling me they love me, but didn't want to love the only people that I love. Does that make sense? It was an extremely difficult situation because they were constantly trying to love me and I was constantly trying to pull away. Uh-huh. And yet I had nowhere else to go. So I was trying to also love them. And my character does the exact same thing. So in that situation, so to make my, life worse, my foster parents were also converts. Now, being in the church and being a convert in a convert family is completely different than being in a family that is generational, because they don't do things like family home evening. They don't have traditions. They don't have the culture. Oh my goodness, you have cats.
Yeah, sorry.
So that was kind of one more thing that made me different. Okay, so we're going to add on top of that, my adopted mom, or she was my foster mom, who was not a homemaker. She was not close to a homemaker. She had a graduate degree. She was a scientist. She was extremely smart, and she worked. So she did not fit in with, our church women. So here I am trying to make sense of families can be together forever when, I forgot one important part. My foster parents also split up, and they did split up they got divorced. They did not live together, but were married. They lived 3 hours apart. And I lived with my mom, and my dad lived with himself. And we would see each other on the weekends. So I feel like I had 5 things, basically, that made me completely different than normal Latter-day Saints, or Mormons is what we called ourselves then. And the idea of how, as a foster child, do I fit in to an eternal concept was just something that I was like, I kind of came up with the concept or the realization that technically we're all foster children. If we are all God's children and we are sent here on earth, then our parents are really just our foster parents. They're technically not our parents, And that idea literally didn't even it should have made me feel better, but I felt at that time an even more rejection from my Heavenly Father because of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry. He's
no, you're fine. The cat loves you.
A little too much sometimes. It's a little weird.
So it was just one of those things that I got to add to. So that's pretty much why I created the world, was me trying to reconcile. And it wasn't because I felt like I had to make something that had to do with faith. I think we write what we know, and I cannot disconnect myself. You can completely read the book, not spiritually. If you read the book, you could read it as the Watchers and the Lambians. And there's two different societies in the book. The Lambians are the people who like to learn, and that's the secular thing that they do. And the Watchers just literally feed on basically television and entertainment. Like, they cannot progress because they need to be entertained. And in our society right now, that is how the world has become. I would propose that our society is not divided between the rich and the poor. It is divided by those who want to learn, or the doers, and the people who just watch, like the people that just want to stay still, and not necessarily because they're lazy, but because sometimes they're just content. Like, some people just do the way that their life is. They just want to be entertained. They want to, sit around and watch TV, watch other people's videos, kind of thing. And then you have. Are we running out of time?
No, there's a weird smell. I think my cats are trying to interrupt me. They're not very respectful. Also, what? Hold on. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, like in your case, you have a lot of different things from a sociology aspect. That it's a very interesting case of, and from a theological aspect as well, because the core doctrine for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is more expansive than that of traditional Christianity, which just says God's plan for us is to test us because he wanted to, and our reward for eternity is to worship him in praises. But that those ideas are not founded in facts, that they're founded in the interpretations of men that don't hold the test of time, and that we actually do have a plan, like Jesus Christ alluded to having many mansions, right? So if we're just going to be praising God for eternity, why have many mansions? So a lot of the confusion Christians have and their perspective of what eternity like is just confounded by the apostasy and false doctrines of those laid before. So the plan of salvation is that before we came here, there was a plan for us to be tested and to come to this earth. There was a great battle in heaven, the war in heaven, the adversary and 2/3 of heaven that followed Satan and wanted his idea came to the earth to be basically evil spirits and to test us, and that this life is a probation. And if we are righteous enough and we choose to follow Jesus Christ's example, upon final judgment, we have a possibility of living with Jesus Christ forever. In Corinthians, it talks about 3 degrees of glory: celestial, telestial, and terrestrial. And depending on our faith and how much we had a willingness and what covenants we kept in this life, we would do that. So from an LDS perspective, your situation is just like, where do I fit in this story? Because my parents are done. Like you said, your mom was a stripper. Your dad committed murder or was found guilty of murder. not to digress, but I have trust and faith issues with our criminal justice system. Many people have been put in jail for many years, and it turns out that they were actually truly innocent. So I don't know the details of your father's story, but from your perspective, it's like, where do I belong in this? And so I think it's an obvious outcome of you trying to explore this. And then you put into a foster family, and the foster family isn't this, beautiful fairy tale. It's not your fairy tale ending. It's dynamic, and there's issues and tensions. Like you said, that they weren't living together anymore. And there's these little interplays with that. And so from your perspective, I would agree with, like, you kind of feel like you're having like, where do I sit in this story? Where do I have that? And I would say, from being a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's a really hard question to answer, because we don't have all those dynamics. So I think a natural outcome is for you to think about how this would work, and to explore it. And I feel like another thing is, for people who are who are going through your situation now, this book might be helpful for them to relate to. And being in the military, there's just some days, like, I know I should study the scriptures, but it's like I just want to disassociate from everything because of the amount of stress, because of what's going on, because where I'm at, it's very busy. We're the foremost operating base in the world. We're the busiest base. We have Russia, China, and North Korea that we deal with on a daily basis. And if the American public knew how much was going on, there would be a lot more conversations about how to politically navigate these issues that we're having. And so it's just like, the last thing I want to do is sometimes sit down and read the scriptures, but it's probably the first thing I should do. So that's why I try to do that. But I understand kind of what you're going on about. And I think sometimes we have to write stories that allow us to cathartically deal with our experiences.
I think so.
I have a hypothesis that
I think that has really helped me, honestly, because even though I didn't mention it. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tolkien.
I have a hypothesis that Tolkien's books, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and everything that's in there, PTSD wasn't something that was known then. I want to say they called it trench mind or shell shock. I can't remember what the term was. But as somebody who's in the military and been through certain situations, and oddly has PTSD from natural disaster, I'm reading that and I'm like, holy crap! Like, this is his way of dealing with what he went through as a soldier in World War I. And so,
never thought about it like that. That's interesting.
And then from that perspective, I read Lord of the Rings from that perspective, and it's exactly
now
that.
That makes me want to read that again. Now, we had a dog named Gandalf.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you get a little white old beard?
Yeah, it was a cute, sweet lab.
Oh, of course, it would be a lab.
My adopted. It was a lab. My parents had a lot of labs.
But yeah, so anybody who's listening, if you want an excuse to reread Lord of the Rings, read it from the perspective of J.R.R. Tolkien is dealing with his PTSD from the atrocities he
Sure.
So, but
yeah, huh? That's a new original take. I mean, at least for me, I never heard that.
Yeah, this is the other thing. You're like, oh wow, this is new. Nobody's ever thought of this, and then you're scrolling through something, and you're like, oh no.
I hear
no.
you.
So I always try to think that it is, but yeah, it's interesting. From so I do a lot of D&D. I'm actually doing a campaign. The military base commander here kind of told organizations, because a lot of the organizations on Friday and Saturday would close around like 9 or 10. And his perspective was, are military members getting in trouble through drinking incidents because there's nothing else open to do? And so his direction to these different organizations and restaurants and things is, you're going to be open later, so that our military members have an alternative place to go. So like if you wanted to go play board games with your friends, one of the USO was open until 9 on a Friday, and then it was closed. And so it was like almost encouraging people to go out and do that. And so now everything's open. And one of the things I'm partaking in is running, assisting and helping the Dungeons and Dragons events that we're trying to do once a quarter. But it's awesome because
that is very a good world building experience. I've never done it. I've never played.
I would say as a writer, you should. I think every writer should, because when you're writing your book, and how many pages is Kalani?
400, something like that.
Okay. Imagine as you were writing all 400 pages of that, you had an audience of 5 to 6 people critiquing you as you went. And they're also acting as the characters. So it's interesting.
Well, I mean,
from a D&D perspective.
Well, every chapter that came out of my brain, I had, I was in 2 different writing groups, and I would go twice when I lived in Houston. I went twice. So I had over 40 people's opinion on my book. Unfortunately, when I finished trying to, start the marketing thing and get back to writing for book 2, I need to find another writing group because, it's Alabama. I'm going to have to find one online instead of going in person. But I did enjoy, I enjoyed all of my writing friends. Probably more than I loved hearing their stories, even though they weren't sci-fi. I got invested in their characters, and one of my favorites was a steampunk girl. So I'm gonna have to look her up and see what she's doing.
I'm going to send you a link to a Discord, but one of the channels in the Discord deals with writing. I don't want to give the name out because I don't know if they're trying to broadcast it much. We've been keeping it kind of hush hush. But there's a big writing segment. A few writers, LDS published authors are in the group, so I'll send that to you. But yeah, writing something in a vacuum, I would say, is very difficult because you do need that feedback. And a hard aspect for DM is for me, I invest myself in a story I think will be interested. And they, as a player, will be so hyper focused on playing through their character. So it's like learning to compromise to give them enough incentive to follow the story along. And so it takes a lot of skill to learn how to, I don't care that your character's a foster pirate child who has his own ship right now and you're doing a Princess Bride. You're going to go to that tavern and ask that man for the question, right? And you have to learn how to do that in a skillful way that encourages people. It's like herding cats. And, I have cats right now, and that's really what it is. Each cat wants to do their own thing, and you're trying to do that. And so it takes a lot of skill. So if you can't find a writing group, I would suggest going, if there's any D&D nearby, which is Alabama, it might be there. I haven't been there in 10 years, so I can't say anything. But I think that might be.
So is it my turn? I want to ask you questions.
Oh, sure. You can ask me questions.
Okay. So what is it? No, sorry. What is it like being in the military and being a member? Um,
It is different.
like what? Yeah.
So this is where it's kind of like those obfuscated math questions where you start adding a bunch of Greek numbers and letters and divisions and parentheses and parentheticals and it you just like, what is this? That is what it's like to be a member in the church. There's so many different factors that level into your experience. The common, so there's 6 branches, but for sake of it, Space Force and Air Force are the same thing because Air Force, for some reason, was allowed to be in charge of the Space Force. From that,
Which force are you in?
Air Force.
Air Force.
So my experience as an enlisted member in the Air Force is different than the experience of an enlisted member in the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps. If I was an officer, my experience would be different from that. And I actually attend a military ward. There's a couple military wards on island, and just seeing how different things are. For instance, when I was, when I was in the young single adult program before I met my wife, it was a bunch of dudes just showing up to hang out with each other. And it wasn't like it was supposed to be young single adult activities to meet, perspectives. But when there's no females, it's just to go hang out with church bros and kind of, build some camaraderie. And we had one female, and I didn't know this, but we were going through the gate one day, and when they check your ID card, if you're an officer, they get saluted. Mm-hmm. And we had just gone back from eating somewhere, and everyone was in my car, and I didn't notice. I just handed the ID cards, the military police, and he randomly saluted the car, and I was like, huh? Who's in the car as an officer? And it was the female. And I was like, that's why everyone's so weird around her. I didn't know this, just because of fraternization rules in the Marine Corps are some of the strictest in terms of officer to enlisted relationships. So there you have this strange dynamic. You're finally in a group of people of your own faith who are single, but because of your rank and because of your commission, you have complete inability to have any sort of relationship with. I think there was one individual that they talked about it because he was getting out of the Marine Corps. He had a terminal date set, basically. And so they kind of talked about it, but I guess they just really didn't want to go anywhere with that. So that's an aspect that's wholly going to be unique and different. I think dealing with the peer pressure, you're going to have to learn to do it, because in the military, they're giving more people different options, especially in the Air Force, to deal with stress. But it's the common way to deal with stress in the military is nicotine and alcohol. That's how you basically survive. And in a lot of the situations, like, there's things that I can't tell my spouse that is going on. I'm just like, it's going to be stressful for a minute, and I'm sorry. I'm going to be working in.
Is she there in Japan?
Yeah, she is here with me now, and that's a whole other stress factor and issue, and a lot of these things. The ward I attend is primarily Navy folks, with sprinkling of some Air Force and Army personnel. And in the Navy, they do naval ship rotations, where we will have, like, the Elders Quorum president will go out to sea for 6 months at a time. So he's not really the Elders Quorum president, like, he is on paper, he is set apart as the Elders Quorum president and has those keys and duties. But at the same time, it's his second counselor, first counselor who are running it, because he's out at sea for 6 months and then comes back for a month or two and then gets right back out to sea. Right. So it's a very different dynamic. And so it's just kind of hard. I think there's a lot more people in the military who are cognizant of people do have families. So I saw that email went out that the wing commander was encouraging work centers according to Manning and the requirements for first day of school back to allow parents to, be there for their kids' first day of school. Right. So I think there's a lot more cognizance of, these are human beings. We should treat them as such. So it's very different. Do I recommend it to members of the church? I think you should treat it like going on a mission with much fasting and prayer. And I think that you have to make that decision because at very least, if you go enlisted, that's a 6-year decision with technically 2 years tacked on for inactive reserves for those that would be applicable to. So, but yeah, it's different. And it definitely affects you and you have different experiences. And so, and we're also at a really weird time as a country too, because we're not actively engaged in a conflict. People in the comments of this will disagree, but we're not in the Middle East right now, actively in Afghanistan doing mission operations. So it's a little bit at a different time. So like, for instance, trainees that would go to basic training would automatically get the General War on Terrorism Service Medal. But with us pulling out of Afghanistan completely, that's not even a thing anymore. So there's airmen coming in with just a Air Force graduation ribbon. That's it. So it's a very different time. Would I recommend
So
it
aside from like the dating, and does the rank affect being friends with different things? Because for example, here, I could be friends with someone in a different social class or somebody that is, has a different occupation because we're both members of the church. We might be unlikely friends, but what binds us is, the church. In the military, is that the case? Or does the rank mess up those friendships?
Not yes and no. There's a dynamic to it, and it depends on which branch you're in. For instance, in my ward I was attending before I was stationed overseas, I was set aside as a ward missionary, and the ward mission leader was actually my group commander. So he was the boss over my boss. And it was just really interesting because outside of church, I would randomly see him and he would have a conversation with me, and everyone's going like, what? So it just depends. I always thought that was funny because he would call me by my first name. And so it created a lot of mystery of like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, I just go to church with them. It's okay. But I think some people can kind of make it more awkward than it needs to be. We're all adults. Like, there's a certain amount of professionalism with it. And then it just depends on what
about the actual culture of the church? How is the culture of the church different there than it is here? And not just with the military, but actually in Japan versus in the United States?
The military,
the
military culture in Japan, just because of of how the church is and how it fluctuates, like, it's constantly changing. I would say drama happens regardless because people are people, right? But the typical drama that you would see probably at your church does not really exist here because if you don't like somebody, they're going to be gone in 2 to 3 years. There are some members who work for the Department of Education for the on-base schools that have been here for a long time. There's retired individuals who married a Japanese spouse and they are here. It just depends on that dynamic of how they are, what their branches are in. I find people to be very welcoming, because there's been times where work or whatever's happened and I'll show up and they think I'm a brand new member, but I'm like, I've been here since 2017. I'm not new. Oh, sorry.
Don't you hate that?
Yeah. I'm like, but that's
like,
also
I'm just wearing a different dress. I'm the same person.
Yeah.
I just dyed my hair a different color. Same person.
Then I feel guilty. Like, oh, I should probably, like COVID, right? I knew everybody before COVID. COVID happened. And then I come back to church and there's 3 people that I know. And they're like,
I felt the same way.
Yeah. So it's just, it's different.
I felt the same way.
The Japanese members are really, really amazing. I got to do a couple activities with them, and they're really awesome. Some of them will speak English. Most of them don't, but because they don't speak English, that they don't treat you rude. But that's just how typically Asian cultures are more respectful for interactions with people that they don't know.
Quiet.
No, they're just polite. Like they acknowledge you, whereas American would just ignore you.
Unless you're me, and then I get in everybody's face and I'm like, hello. Like, oh my goodness. I just know. Okay, so one more question before I get off and get something to eat. What is the one thing about Japan that you like the most so far?
I'm a history person. I grew up watching the History Channel and Discovery Channel when it was actually about discovery and history before it became reality TV shows. I always found it fascinating watching a documentary on ancient Rome or the civilizations. I always read different things. I'm into the new examinations of archaeology and taking new perspectives of that. And it's just really crazy. Where I'm at is Okinawa, and it is a very old island chain. The island chain is called Ryukyu, which in Japanese translates to dragon. The Ryukyus have been here for a very long time, and the Okinawan people are distinct indigenous people that belong to this island, but because of China and Japan for over 1,500 years, have kind of played a very huge role in affecting what the island culture is. So without knowing anything, you would assume that, Okinawa is just Japanese, but there's a distinct people that come from here. They have their own culture, their food, traditions, and festivals. Like the Issa festival, for instance, they dress up in traditional garb and they go around the city at night, basically welcoming in the dead and rejoicing or showing the festivals. It's just a little bit different with what they do in their culture. I went on a battle of
Okinawa. Very interesting.
It is. It's very interesting. I went on a Battle of Okinawa tour, and the Battle of Hacksaw, or the Hacksaw Ridge, was a famous, because there's actually a movie with Andrew Garfield about a Seventh-day Adventist conscientious objector who saved, I want to say, like over 80 people. And so when we were there, we had to walk up, but as we were walking up, I saw a sign. And so when we walked back, we had some extra time, and I walked down this way. And where I came to was a ancient shrine where they couldn't really depict how old it was, they could depict like what artifacts have been found there around, almost, I want to say like 900 years potentially is when they were finding things through there. So it's a very, very old island with many, many different stories to tell. So it's a different perspective. Unfortunately, to how things have worked out, I haven't really gotten to go explore mainland Japan as much as I would want. But it's a very different perspective. So it's pretty different. So I think if I ever
I'm gonna
write
go
my
eat.
own
Thank you
story.
so much for this interview. It was good to get to know you.
But yeah,
right?
Thanks, Jolene.
I bet people would be very interested in the Japanese, maybe like a Japanese, like a, I don't know, war story. Not like a war story, but like, I don't know. What kind of writing do you want to write? Would you write like a sci-fi
So without taking too much of your time,
kind of thing, or would you write more of a, like a?
I would want to write a high fantasy sci-fi, and I've had different ideas of what to do with that, but I've come to a conundrum of, I feel like as an author and as a member of this faith, I sort of have a responsibility in the stories I tell. I think there's too much wickedness in the world. I don't want to add something accidentally to that, right? So, and I also feel like I haven't had enough life experiences yet that I would feel comfortable being able to write and put myself in the I want some more experience. So I think if you ever do see anything, it's probably going to be like a science fiction, high fantasy sort of blended novel, because I love those two genres, and I have some ideas on how that would work. But I think that's a retirement Logan thing to do.
Right. Well, you can always just keep building your following, because that was apparently what I should have done first before I wrote the book. It's a
different way to do stuff. But so if people want to go read Kalani, Shadow of Destiny, I'll make sure we drop the link in the bio. But when is the official release? How can people get their hands on it?
It is already released. It is on Amazon. It is in print. It is in print. It is on ebooks, and currently it is free on Kindle Unlimited. So if they want a digital copy and they have Kindle, if they have Kindle Unlimited, then they can get a download, free this month with that. But yeah, it's available on Amazon. I'm trying to get it, contact the local bookstores. They can actually even, you can buy it online at Barnes & Noble as well. I noticed that because the publisher is, it's a worldwide distributor, creative space. It's Kindle. Kindle publishing took over Creative Space. So, and I'm just used to calling it Creative Space. So Kindle publishing works with Ingram distribution. And in order to get like things in Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and other things, you need to go through Ingram. And so it is available, but only online. Unless they specifically start having like a demand for it, then they will. Then I could get it in the store. So that is my new thing. I'm trying to just get reviews, kind of get the word out there, like, your song.
And for those in the audience that are interested, if you click the link in the show notes, she does have an ARC review. You will get an access to it to review. So if you're a legitimate reviewer or would like to do that, there's a way for you to do that. And if somebody is really into collecting books and author signatures, would you be open to sending them a signed copy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. I don't know how that would work. I haven't ever had to do that, because I would have to buy it, sign it, and then so, yeah,
send it,
and then attend it as well. So it would, I'm not sure how that would necessarily work when they don't actually live here. But my daughter does live in Rexburg, Idaho. She's currently at BYU, Idaho. I've got another one that will go there. So it is very possible that I could go out to the Utah area. I'm, or, if I was asked to go somewhere, I would not be turning it down, I mean, I got invited to Japan. I mean, or
Yeah, sorry. The spiritual danger close
I might make it happen.
funds are a little dry coffer. It's more cobwebs. But thank you so much, Jolene. I hope you have a great day.